is Keys to the Shop, Founder Friday edition. Today we're talking with Kyle Ramage and Lem Butler of Black and White Coffee Roasters. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and of course, as always, I'm happy to have you along. Welcome, and I would love for you to be subscribed to the show. So easy to do. You just kind of hit the subscribe button wherever you happen to be listening to the show. If you love Keys to the Shop and you've benefited from the conversations, the topics, I'd be so grateful if you would leave a 5-star rating or review over at Apple Podcasts or even on Spotify, wherever they allow you to do the whole rating thing. That would be great because it helps the show, as well as, just feels great to see people just give feedback. It's kind of funny because, you think that with all the listens and downloads and everything else, that there's a lot of feedback coming. But with podcasts, sometimes it's just like you put it out there, it gets listened to. I trust that it's been helpful, but when I hear back from listeners about what the show has accomplished for them and even feedback of how the show can improve, all that is just so life-giving. That's called feedback culture. We talked to here on the show a lot about that. But anyway, grateful for all of you who have done that thus far in the show. Now I want to let you know that Keys to the Shop, on top of producing this podcast and offering this as a resource for the coffee community, also does consulting and coaching. Keys to the Shop Consulting is all about working one-on-one with entrepreneurs that are just getting started in the coffee industry or seasoned veterans of the industry, people who have successful coffee shops and operations that are currently running that want to take things to the next level. They have issues or projects or opportunities that they need some clarity on and some help walking through to really make the right decisions for their business and for themselves. So you as the operator can actually get joy from the process of running your business and look and see a thriving coffee shop when you're out there in the cafe. That's what I love doing. That's what drives Keys to the Shop and Keys to the Shop Consulting. So if you've got some things you want to work out or work on, I would love to talk with you. Just email chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS @keystotheshop.com. And let's have a conversation. With a free discovery call, we can really talk about a lot. Again, that email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. The wonderful thing about coffee is that it's a beverage that you get to enjoy every day. And the everyday nature of coffee makes it such a great way to sort of punctuate the day or to start it off on the right foot. And when you can get a really amazing cup of coffee to start your day, it just changes everything. With machines like the ground control Cyclops brewer from Voga Coffee, this takes that beginning of your day and elevates it to a place where it has not been before, I think. Really, truly an amazing company. Innovation is a word that's used a lot in the industry, but rarely is it something that is so deeply true as it is about the ground control. The SCA award-winning technology allows you to access flavors and depth and range of coffee that is unprecedented. And it's like getting to know your coffee all over again. It's truly amazing. And not only is this a game-changing batch brewer, the ground control also makes tea, batch diced lattes, batch cold brew. So there's a lot of opportunity to open up different profitability streams in your coffee and better workflow as well. So check them out at groundcontrol.coffee. Find out more about this amazing piece of equipment. As you are listening to this, there might be a few days left of the 50% off sale that they're having for their ground control Cyclops brewer. I would encourage you to take advantage of that quickly. As this episode's coming out on the 26th of May, and the end of May is when that sale ends. So chop, get to it. But definitely check them out. Quality, innovation, next level extraction capabilities. The ground control Cyclops brewer is amazing. Check them out again at groundcontrol.coffee. As a barista, it's easy to kind of fall into a lull of monotony, making drinks all day long. And when that monotony is broken is often when a customer looks at their drink or tastes it and compliments the barista. A lot of people are busy. They just take the drink and they go. That's fine. We're a service industry. We're serving people. We're not making them serve us. But when people take the time to say, oh, this is amazing, or this is beautiful, it makes a big difference. And that applies just as much to our plant-based beverages as it does to any other beverage. So that's why when you choose what to use on the bar, if you want more of those experiences, I feel like you need to be using the Barista series from Pacific. The Barista series is a line of plant-based performance beverages that is designed for baristas and tested and approved by baristas all over the world. It's why anything you choose from their lineup will perform amazingly on bar, stands up to the heat from steaming, produces awesome texture, and keeps the balance focused on the beverage. The flavor is just harmonious. And so I would encourage you to get samples and try it for yourself. Visit them at pacificfoodservice.com to do that. And I think you truly will be impressed. If you want the best plant-based beverages, you want to create those really special moments for your customers time and again with plant-based drinks, I think you should be using the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, today we are going to be talking with a couple of people who are just powerhouses in the coffee industry. We're talking with Kyle Ramage and Lem Butler from Black and White Coffee Roasters in North Carolina. Now, both Lem and Kyle are U.S. Barista Champions. Lem in 2016, Kyle in 2017. Their careers span decades in the business of coffee through different jobs, training, working with equipment. Of course, again, with the competitions and being U.S. Barista Champions, they have set a high bar for themselves as individuals in the coffee industry with their careers and are accomplished in their own rights, both Kyle and Lem. And then coming together to form Black and White, it just brings it to a whole new level. And when they formed Black and White Coffee Roasters, they got to work together and find out that they really complemented each other in their work styles and their giftings. And Black and White Coffee Roasters, since its founding in 2017, has been a standard bearer for quality coffee and in their cafes for hospitality. I think it's fair to say that they've been nothing short than iconic with what they've been working on over the years with Black and White Coffee. So today, I'm really excited to have them on the show to talk about the journey of founding Black and White Coffee Roasters and how all of this developed and how it's been going since then. And, Lem and Kyle have both been on the show. Kyle, after he won the Barista Championships in 2017, Lem was one of the original guests on the show in a live episode from Knoxville. I think it was in 2017 also. So it was really cool to get these guys on the same podcast talking about their story. And I think you're going to find it really instructive, especially if you're working with other people and running a business. Of course, we talk about how they work together, how they complement one another, the genesis of the idea for Black and White Coffee Roasters, and then just about the evolution of their approach to running cafes, as well as roasting and sourcing and communicating their love for different types of coffees, especially the funkier coffees, the more out there coffees. They're really known for this, but they also have a balance with kind of gateway coffees, the standards. And I really enjoyed this conversation because we take a bunch of different turns, talking about complementary strengths, talking about marketing, talking about coffee and competition. It's really a rich discussion. So I'm hoping that you really enjoy this. Let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with the founders of Black and White Coffee Roasters, Kyle Ramage and Lem Butler. All right, Kyle, Lem, welcome to Keys to the Shop. I'm excited to have you both on the show.
Excited to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I feel like I've been trying to, we've been just in communication about getting on the show for a bit now. So this feels pretty cool to have you both here. And you're just busy guys, both barista champions, running a great coffee business. You got a lot of stuff going on, but glad to have you on the show. So for Founder Friday, there's always a lot to cover. And, Black and White as a company is just iconic. I think you all both as individuals just were highly influential right from the get-go, but coming together in this business especially, you've made a lot of waves in the years. But I want to start from the beginning. how did you both meet? You were both in competitions, but how did you just, begin your friendship and come up with this idea to start Black and White Coffee Roasters?
In the very beginning, we were, I guess Lem was a customer support rep for Counterculture, and I was just a barista in a cafe here in Raleigh called Jubala Village Coffee. That was the kind of beginnings of it all. I guess it just, as with most relationships, it kind of sprung up from that.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship just kind of grew through competition and me being at Jubala an awful lot, And then I believe it was, man, when did you start at Mount Koenig? Gary Horn, yeah. Gary Horn approached me. He was like, do you know anyone that would fit, this position at Mount Koenig, USA in Durham? And, Kyle popped up in my mind. So I suggested it to Kyle and Gary that they talk. But I can't remember what year that was.
That had to be, it had to have been 2012 maybe? Probably 2013. 2014, somewhere in that kind of category. Yeah, time is a flat circle for me these days. I can't remember that far back.
Him working with Mount Koenig over the years, I find myself backstage at nationals in Atlanta preparing for finals. And, first time in finals in the U.S. Barista competition, I was a touch nervous and kind of lost my palate. And with Kyle being backstage, working on grinders and just organizing the Mount Koenig grinders, I was like, hey, dude, just come and taste this coffee to see if I'm too far off. And I think that was just the genesis of us going to Worlds and kind of coming up with this idea of Black and White.
Excellent. So you kind of started feeling like there's a professional chemistry here, and between the two of you, Lem, you were the U.S. Barista Champion for 2016, and then the next year, Kyle, in 2017, you won it. And so it feels like this relationship has been, kind of sequential. Like you're kind of good for each other in this coffee kind of way.
Yeah, definitely. I think our differences and different ways of looking at things are, when they're lined up, are very, very, very useful. So it's just like one of those things where different perspectives and different viewpoints and different ways of thinking and different ways of doing can cover more ground than if you just all think the same way.
Yeah, that was a time when, I was like, I've done competitions a certain way, and I really liked how Kyle's mind is a little more mechanical and scientific than mine. So I asked him to coach me for Worlds, get me really prepared for, what I was up against. I mean, typically you're up against yourself, but I wanted to change my approach to presentations, and did so well in a competition. And I think that kind of got Kyle excited about competing again, and he asked me to do the same thing for him. And it's kind of unheard of that, well, one, I'm the first Black barista and the first baristas from the South to win the nationals, and then two baristas from the South win nationals back to back. It was kind of a special moment, those 2 years.
Yeah, so you were in that season of life, you're becoming self-aware, or at least through the competitions, realizing that there was a complementary aspect of the other person. I'm curious, in terms of that dynamic, if Kyle, you have a scientific mind, then Lem, or I guess maybe you have a more artistic mind, a more right-brained, as they say.
Yeah, definitely more right-brained. My background before coffee was music and art, and just kind of like that creative side of me. And I've always applied it to coffee. When I started in coffee, we didn't use, back in 2003, no one used scales, and no one dosed out anything really except for batch brew. Pour over wasn't really a thing. So it wasn't like, very scientific back then. It was just like, oh, it's great coffee. Let's kind of feel how the shot pulls. Let's watch for certain things, how the shot extracts out of the portafilter. Let's feel how the milk temperature feels in the pitcher. It wasn't very scientific back then, and that kind of fit, my background. It fit great, and that's why I kind of fell in love with coffee a bit.
in the competitions at that time, we're shifting, it seems, to favor a more scientific approach. Where when I was competing back in similar time frames, way back, 7-8 years prior, 2016 or so, who knows? It's all just bleeding into one another. But it did feel like if you were just slightly creative in the way that you presented coffee and you were passionate about it, it really counted for a lot of points. And as the industry, maybe it was the industry and the competitions simultaneously, progressing towards scientific approaches, not losing the art, but gaining the science. Does that feel like a fair assessment?
Yeah, definitely. Everyone was, putting their feelings in their hearts and creating these amazing stories. So as soon as, I can't remember who it was, but as soon as someone introduced this kind of scientific, okay, this is what you're tasting in the cup, but here's why you're tasting what you're tasting in the cup. And they're applying all the scientific knowledge of at the farm, at the roasting. I mean, back in the day, you had very little talking from the competitors. The MC, back when I competed in regionals, the MC interviewed the competitors as they're preparing drinks for the judges. And it was the responsibility, of the MC to pull information out of the competitors to make it more exciting for the audience. Why are they making 4 espressos? And then the the MC would explain that and ask, the competitor. That's actually how I got my nickname Sexy Foam back in the day. Because, Peter G was asking me, how do I, steam and texturize the milk? And I was explaining it how my general manager explained it to me. She was always saying you have to create this kind of velvety, sexy foam. And, some guy was in the audience, he made a puppet show and then
I remember this, yes.
Yeah, remember the puppet show? Yeah.
Who was that? Was that Tom from Sweet Maria's?
No, it wasn't even a coffee guy. It was a guy, he had a blog about coffee. He was from Greenville, South Carolina, and I'm drawing he's going to kill me.
Oh, Caffeinated Screeds is what the blog is, had the subheading of Caffeinated Screeds. I know who you're talking about, but the name escapes me.
He moved out to the UK.
Yeah.
But yeah, that puppet show kind of popularized that name. But that's how it was back in the day. There wasn't really any scientific information. And that was one thing that I liked about, Kyle's presentations when he competed. They were very, scientific. And that was the direction. I don't know what year that was, but that was kind of the direction the competition started moving towards, because that was more, for lack of a better word, interesting,
Kyle, let me ask you then a question regarding this dynamic. And then I want to talk a little bit about how this actually all coalesced into this actual business. But if you're this scientific mind and maybe ironically black and white thinker, I don't know if that's an extension of that, then benefited, I suppose, from Lem's artistic approach to things as he was coaching you.
Yeah. I would say so, definitely. Like the, how did I describe it? The robot in Mr. Smooth, I think was the way I talked about it. Is because I'm a bit more nuts and bolts, a bit more mechanical with just thought processes in general. I'm definitely not a scientist. I want to definitely say that out loud. I don't have a background in chemistry or mathematics or anything like that. I just have a mind that enjoys learning and repeating and finding patterns in repetition. So I love to speak with very intelligent scientists, chemists, all those people. I've collaborated with them a bunch, but I definitely want to put it out there that I don't have this science background that people kind of assume I have. I just enjoy the idea, but yeah, it definitely benefited me to have some of those rough edges kind of smoothed off and learn to present something linguistically that was more flowing and more careful and more measured versus being just a little bit more matter of fact, which is more my natural default, if you will. It's been very helpful to add some cool to the dorky stuff. Yeah.
I love it. And I think the name of the guy was Ben Sobody.
Yeah, that's him.
The Sexy Foam puppet show. And, this is interesting to think about your pedigrees as competitors, the chemistry as coaches. and colleagues. Now, in opening a coffee shop, it's a different animal altogether, right? Like starting a business, you've both worked in coffee long enough to know what you're doing. But one of the hardest things for people to do is open with partners, maybe, whether that's a friend or a relative, a spouse or whatever. So getting into the actual business behind the scenes of coffee, how did that feel when you first started? And how did you first start? Was it just roasting at first and then the cafe? How did you get the ball rolling once you decided to do this?
That was, well, it goes back to 2016 in Dublin when we were sitting in 3FE talking about the amazing service and quality of, that cafe. And we started, piecing together, we had this general conversation about, the equipment would be all white or the equipment would be all black, and we would call it Black and White Cafe. And that kind of like started this idea of starting a cafe together. And in 2017, between Kyle winning in Seattle and the Worlds being in Seoul in November, we were presented with an opportunity from one of his former professors who had started a roastery / cafe in Wake Forest, North Carolina. He no longer wanted to do that, so he asked if we wanted to buy it.
Oh, wow.
And so that entire summer, we figured out how to purchase back alley. And we did, and it was great. And it was weird that it happened in between nationals and worlds because he competed as a machine manufacturing company, competing under his own roastery, which was pretty cool.
That's quite a jump. Yeah, Kyle.
Yeah, no, that's. We've told this story a couple times, so it's pretty succinct. But yeah, that's the way we. You asked kind of what was the initial feelings. As you might imagine, overwhelmed would be one of those things. I was having a conversation with Colin Whitcomb way back when, and he told me something that sticks with me, and I use it all the time. It says, "You can't know what you don't know," and that seems very obvious, but it's one of those things that I see living out in my life pretty regularly. Like, oh, I didn't know that, but I couldn't know it because I didn't know it. So now I know it, and sometimes you have to do it the hard way, which is, maybe that's the way we did it, was the hard way, but it's pretty fun.
Well, it's very pragmatic, so it eliminates, or it helps eliminate some of the guilt that you might feel or the frustration with yourself, so you can just get on with life.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and shout out to Colin over at Canary Coffee, right? He's
doing his own thing now.
That's right. So the fear of getting into the unknown, but the pragmatism of saying, okay, well, we're just going to learn from these. Was there a lot of a feeling that your competitive history kind of helped you be a little bit more pragmatic? And this is, for both of you, speaking about, your competitive backgrounds, you craft an experience and you edit yourselves and you have other people give you feedback for what you're doing, but you're taking over an existing business. And so that's a double unknown, because now you've got the expectations of maybe people that had gone there before, plus overlaying your desire for what you want it to be. You've got a whole set of judges now in the customer base, and you've got this presentation, which is your coffee bar. Is there an interplay between those two things, and how did you approach making this place your own?
Yeah, that was one of the pressing concerns on my mind. To younger guys coming into this community cafe and taking over and changing everything, because I can't remember how long Dr. McKenzie was there, but maybe 4 or 5 years?
It was just 2
years. Oh, it was just 2 years?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, he did a lot in 2 years. So yeah, it was that fear of like coming into this community where neither one of us lived. I mean, I guess you lived there, Kyle, when you were in school.
Mm-hmm.
But I never had any affiliation with Wake Forest. I mean, it's only 15 minutes from Raleigh, but I've never stepped foot in Wake Forest before. So, taking over a community cafe and roastery was interesting. And just having the accolades of, United States Barista Champions who have gone to Worlds and were finalists, and, how much would that play into it? Probably not much, but yeah, that was all on my mind. But, I've always looked at it as, taking a leap of faith in yourself that you can do what you set your mind to. And, and I learned very early on in coffee that, you take care of, the people around you and the actual product, the coffee, and you'll be fine. And so that was my approach to, taking over this community hub, really.
What do you mean by taking care of the people and the coffee? And I kind of can fill in the blank in my head, but specifically, what does that mean opening when you're serving your community through the coffee shop and taking care of the coffee? Practically speaking, how did you make plans to execute on that decision?
Well, that was kind of like the premise behind, starting Black and White. Both Kyle and I have both seen, great coffee professionals who would love to stay in coffee, but couldn't find their path in coffee, or they worked for a company that didn't really, value them and value their time. So they ended up leaving the industry. And both Kyle and I have had like amazing opportunities. And me, with these awesome opportunities that I've had, I was kind of naive to the rest of the industry and how baristas were treated and how other coffee professionals were treated. So when we sat down to talk about what Black and White coffee roasters meant, the whole purpose was to create opportunities for people in coffee. And so, and I learned that, when I started working in coffee in a small cafe, Jane Brown owned and operated she was one of the only independent operators on the campus of UNC at Chapel Hill. And she was super successful because she really took care of both people on both sides of the counter, the customers and her staff, by making sure that, the wages were equal to the standard of living, by making sure the customers were comfortable and had everything that they needed. It was a tiny cafe, so she had set up this amazing patio outside to make people feel comfortable, the students feel comfortable. And that kind of philosophy I've always carried with me, even into going into counterculture and becoming, bagging coffee, kind of like building this rapport with the rest of the production staff and becoming the head blender and, kind of guiding, the staff into, the philosophy of counterculture and getting them to come and taste coffees instead of just bagging coffees, come into the training center and cup coffees with the rest of the staff. And then taking that into the wholesale side of things and being a customer support rep, just meeting all kinds of different coffee shop owners and restaurant owners and just kind of building that rapport, connecting people, building community. And that's what I mean by taking care of people. And you have to take care of people on both sides of the counter, your staff and the customers. It's not just about the customers.
Excellent. So the obvious importance of relationships is something that, especially today, as we've said on the show before, opening a coffee shop can sometimes, it seems like, okay, this is going to be really hard. And I think it is, but there's also a pretty low barrier to entry in opening a coffee shop, which, today there's, lots of resources to do it. And you've seen so many different models of coffee shops before opening this one. I'm glad that you kind of landed collectively on this idea of just building great relationships and using coffee as a vehicle to do that versus, if you hadn't have had the experiences that you have had up until this point, you might have just kind of opened something that was just a little bit more, maybe I will say shallow in the way that it's presented to people and gimmicky, but that it's not. It's a lot deeper than that. And the coffee itself is part of that too. So, one of the things that you all are known for, of course, is great coffee. So you've got this expression of a shop, but I guess, did you start roasting right away when you opened this place? And how did you start to kind of show care through the crafting of the beverage itself? And how did that evolve?
So I'll give you a little bit more backstory on Tracy before we kind of go. It'll make a little bit more sense. So Tracy was a professor of mine from grad school, and so he had started a cafe. And one day, kind of out of the blue, he asked me to do some consulting work for him. So I just gave him some pointers, gave him some tips, and the question he posed me was like, "Hey, if money was no object, what roasting?" Oh, well, if money is no object, I would have what they have at Coffee Collective. I'd have a Loring. And he says, Oh, okay, cool. That's great. All right, well, I'll talk to you some other time. And I'm sure the conversation went slightly different than that, but so, for us fast forward, 6 months later, and Tracy's like, "Oh, I bought a 15 kilo loring for my new roasting space." I was like, "Oh, wow, that's a very aggressive move from like," because his coffee bar at the time had like, it didn't have an espresso machine. It was just a pour over bar, no batch brew, nothing like that. It was roasting on like a 1 pound American roaster core roaster.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And his bar was built out of pallets.
Yes, it was rustic for sure. But yeah, so it was kind of a wild kind of acceleration. He's an incredibly intelligent gentleman, has multiple doctorates, and was like a college. I think it was a running back in college, and this like so he was like not only like this athlete and this amazing mind. It was just a very inspiring person to get to know. Could calculate his DTR, development time percentage stuff, like in his head, like live. So like as the roast is running, he can run those numbers and give himself his percentages, which, I mean, I roasted coffee for, I guess, it's almost 6 years now, and I for sure cannot do that, even remotely close. So it was just, I was like, oh, cool, I want to stretch the roast out by 15 seconds. And he's like, oh, well, cool, that will change your development time percentage to this. I'm like, what? How do you do that in your head? But anyways, so I say that to say this is, so the roaster already existed when we took the space over. And so we started roasting at the very beginning. You may have noticed I didn't say a whole lot about the cafe experience because I learned pretty quickly that the retail cafe thing was not my personal gifting or my personal place I like to spend most of my time. So I live most of my life here at the roastery. So yes, we started roasting there. I took over that program, knew absolutely nothing. I'd never roasted commercially before that time. I'd roasted some having fun with like a popcorn popper in my backyard, or I had like a Beemore 1600. In Malkunik, we had this Roaster Dynamics Tectesian, which is it's a small 1 pound roaster that caught on fire a couple times. I don't think Gary knows that, but if he's listening, he does now know that I caught that thing on fire multiple times. So yeah, it was trial by fire, I guess, would be how you'd best describe it.
Can I dig into this a little bit? Because I think for the listening audience here, a lot of people that start coffee bars, self-awareness is such an important part of how you decide to spend your time and how you approach your business. And not a lot of people would have the self-awareness to say, this is not really my strong suit. I think they would rather make the business kind of shape to their preferences rather than saying, hey, I know what a business needs and it may not be me in this particular area. So I'm going to like craft a part of the business that I can flourish in. I mean, how did you come to that conclusion? And what I mean is, had you just kind of had to sit down and say, well, it's not working out because I don't like doing it? Or is there something that you were just more passionate about? I mean, how do you cultivate that self-awareness that allows you to move to a different place rather than to move the business to suit your preferences?
There's a little bit of both. It kind of happens pretty naturally that I was just more interested in roasting, but that we knew that from the very beginning. I'd found a lot of interest in that concept. So that was definitely the kind of Pandora's box of stuff that I really enjoyed. Sourcing and roasting, and then fermentation, all that stuff comes later. But yeah, I found the cafe experience to be not loathsome. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but it was just, I didn't wake up and be like, oh yeah, I get to go talk to a bunch of people today about coffee. For a long time, I really thought that was what it meant to be a coffee professional, was to be really passionate and really personable and very out there and forward facing in that particular respect. So I tried really, really hard to kind of cultivate those skills. I did some of that, but it never came natural. It often didn't feel genuine. My excitement about coffee was genuine, but not my excitement to necessarily, walk you through our sweetener options or anything like that. I struggled with that particular part of the social thing for the cafe for a long time. And so eventually I just kind of gave up. I was like, man, there's tons of work to be done on the roasting side. I'll just focus on that. And Lem loves talking to people and finds great joy in it. And I'll let him do that instead. And we had some other cafe members as well.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in at Counterculture, I was, for I was there for 10 years, but 7 years of that, I did customer support, teaching classes, leading the Friday tastings at 10, and just going out in the field and talking to not only cafe owners and baristas, but their customers too, because I'd be there and they'd be like, well, tell me more about counterculture. And, I've always been that, that jack of all trades, master of none, oftentimes better than the master of one kind of guy. So we had roles at Black and White in the beginning that needed to be filled, and we filled them when we needed to. So if there was production to be done, I did production. If there was delivery to be done, I did deliveries. If I needed to be behind the bar, I needed to be behind the bar. If I needed to make the schedule, I made the schedule. I think just coffee in general, all aspects of it, I'm passionate about. But the biggest passion that I enjoy about coffee is how coffee brings people together. And no matter what walk of life you come from, traditionally coffee has always been that beverage that people could gather around and just talk. It just made sense to, be that kind of person in the front and Kyle be in the back. So he's all green and I'm all brown.
Love it. You
maybe we should have called it green and brown.
Green and brown. That works. That works.
Doesn't have that ring to it. It doesn't really.
No. Or the original meaning behind the company.
Yeah.
Now you're approaching this from, your own strengths, but you also have this team of people, I imagine some of whom you've kind of taken on as current staff members. And then also you have to build your team based on the values and character traits that you want to see represented in your business. And this is what would keep people wanting to work with Black and White, whether they're on the phone with you in talks about wholesale relationships or they're just coming to get a vanilla latte from your store. How did you go about taking what you knew were your values? Maybe you can talk about, what those were, but I think you mentioned a good deal about that. And assembling a group of people that will accurately represent that in the customer experience on both ends.
I can't really speak for Kyle, but, when we started the company, there was that fear, of doing this thing. And another fear was, okay, there's a staff at Back Alley already. Are they going to stick around? And everyone stuck around except for one person. And so I had in my mind that we had to grow this business and use, these really big companies to really promote the business. And we found this PR firm that would do the website and do the branding. And it just didn't turn out the way we wanted it to in time for, a New York Coffee Festival. And I knew a barista who had, this side business of, wedding photography, and she was pretty good with social media. And I was like, well, let me just reach out to her and find out if she could do a splash page for us. And she came up with it overnight. And she's been very instrumental in our marketing. Jen Hall Sweat is the person I'm talking about. And that kind of made me realize that, we need to look in our backyard and stay true to our purpose and really provide opportunities for people in coffee who are looking for opportunities. And they may not even know that they're looking for opportunities in coffee other than being a barista. But if we have those opportunities there, it gives them a pathway into a career in the coffee industry. And so, Jen has been really instrumental in marketing and creating a brand that represents what we're about. And, just to go back to, that purpose of creating opportunities for people in coffee, our values are service, community, and excellence. A lot of that comes from, that very beginning of me getting into coffee and, taking care of that product, being as excellent at that product as you can, and taking care of the people building that community. We are in the service industry, so hospitality is, the number one thing that we really promote in our cafes. And we look for, with our wholesale team, when they're looking for partnerships for wholesale, we're looking through everything through those three lenses of service, community, and excellence. And that's how we built our team,
Yeah, we got super lucky at the very beginning too. A lot of the staff that were at Back Alley before it turned to Black and White were just crazy talented, crazy passionate people. And
Oh man, Jared was amazing, dude. Oh my gosh, I missed that guy.
Jared and Joel and Amy and the whole crew, Jeff. And so it's like, we inherited this like really rad group of people who were very skilled. Maybe they didn't have all the coffee knowledge in the world, but they were very skilled and very eager to learn. I think that's kind of part of the black and white way is if you come to us and you aren't eager to learn and to grow, it makes the relationship a bit more challenging historically with our staff. It's just been like people want to come and they want to learn, they want to become something more. We that's like a huge thing that we value in our staff. And especially new people bringing different viewpoints to the party has been a really, really fun thing. Yeah. So we've gotten really fortunate to find some just amazing staff members along the way. Jen is the only one that has stuck around this entire time. Joel just left us, maybe a year ago to move back to Baltimore. Maybe more than 2 years now, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, picked up a bunch of amazing people along the way though.
I was curious about your comment regarding growth and coming to a business wanting to grow and why that's so important. And, if I come to a coffee shop and I say, look, I really want to, learn about coffee and maybe I went to a competition, I got exposed to what the greater world of coffee is like. And I go there, but not a lot of places can really absorb that desire for a barista has to grow. In other words, they can't meet it with resourcing or anything practical. It's just nice that the barista has that desire. What are the practical ways that you would approach somebody to say, well, I'm glad you have this desire to grow as a professional. Here's how we are going to help you do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thankfully, we've just collected this amazing group of talented people who are very eager to create more versions of really talented people. So yeah, if it's in the coffee world, between Lem and I, we don't know someone who's an expert in that field. Yeah, I don't know. We'll try to find them, I guess. But we have, over the years, we've kind of compiled such a vast amount of knowledge as well as a vast amount of personal resources and friendships with other incredibly talented people around the world. So if you want to learn about science or you want to learn about processing or you want to learn about roasting or whatever else, we can usually accommodate that request.
Yeah, we try to hire from within when a position opens up, so to create that sort of upward mobility in the company. Some folks just want to stay their lane and they're happy where they are, and other folks, we've had a number of baristas that transitioned into the roasting department and production, and we've had like customers who were interested in coffee and they've become baristas and they've become like Keaton. He's like, what's his role? He's like
production manager.
Production manager, and that guy, I remember him coming in and getting a vanilla latte almost every day. So it's like creating these opportunities for upward mobility in the company to kind of feed into that energy of wanting something more. Because I've been there, 4 years in a cafe, I kind of hit this wall of what else can I do, And I've seen that before, and folks, they can't find that what else, and so they're gone.
Awesome. And it's great to hear, you talking about how people bring different perspectives to the table also. So it's not just you pouring into them, but as you've alluded to, you've been blessed by this group of talented people where I'm sure, their contributions coming in help create what Black and White is today. Even though you both have so much expertise, I think people would almost maybe be intimidated to bring an idea up. But how do you make it approachable for people going into a place that has a reputation like yours to, put their ideas out there and actually contribute to the forward evolution of a company like Black and White?
Yeah, I think it starts with us. If we're not willing to accept ideas and accept critique, that's our failure as leaders. And so that was something I really, really struggled with at the beginning because, like I said, I'm a pretty mechanical, pretty black and white, pretty hard thinker, and the way things should be is the way they should be. So I really had to work on my own way of doing things in that particular regard. But yeah, it's there was a concept that was presented to me that I really loved. The idea was the difference between being a corporate leader or being a corporate idea person and being a military idea person. So the idea is that in corporate America, it's all about who can win, who can step on the most people to get the highest. And so if an idea comes up, someone will take that and not try to improve that idea, but they'll try to like either steal it or cohort it and change it into their own thing to make themselves more grand. Where in the military, when things are a little bit more life and death situated, it's here's my idea, poke all the holes in it we can so that it becomes a great idea. That's the way that I love that this team has kind of worked to poke holes in each other's ideas in order to make them a better version of that idea.
Yeah, throughout the company, we'll send out yearly. We'll send out a survey, an anonymous survey, and they can give feedback on what they feel about their department, about the company. And then also each year we do an employee evaluation, and that's a chance for the managers to sit down with their staff and figure out, where they are, what are their needs, and then we can kind of go from there. There are also other opportunities, especially in the cafes, where we do these seasonal beverages, and they can get really creative to give their input in building a drink or creating a drink for the bar. And the last 2 years, maybe 2.5, 3 years, we've been able to take staff to Expo. And I feel like going to Expo gets staff out of their environment, their work environment, to see the bigger picture and see that there are other opportunities in coffee out there, and kind of create that interest or that drive to something. And I mean, we have like competitors, we have judges, and bringing fresh faces to Expo, we have more employees that want to judge and compete, or volunteer at making coffee at one of our partners' booths. So I think by doing these things, we're kind of nurturing that energy to do more, or to be a part of something, a part of the company.
Oh, that's excellent. And the kind of dynamic relationship that once you have that established as a culture of your business, it feels like, people look at it from the outside and they say, that's what I want for my bar. And so give me 10 steps or give me 3 keys to do that. And if it just is, you've been doing this since, near 10 years. I mean, it's 2017 you founded it. So you've made a lot of consistent decisions in the direction of that. So it feels like you've cultivated this reality and now you're living in the fruit of it.
Yeah, and I want to highlight what you just said, creating that culture, because a lot of business owners will look at what we're doing as, oh, you're putting all this time and resources into developing your staff, and then they're going to leave. And I'm like, yeah, they'll probably leave and go on to do something else in the industry, but we've created this culture of new people coming in, and they understand that culture, and it's just kind of this revolving circle of growth within the company and within the industry. And creating that culture is a part of that value of community, which we live by.
Yeah, I suppose it's like a people version of regenerative farming.
Right.
So, which is kind of weird if you think about it too long. But I do want to talk a little bit about your approach to roasting and sourcing. Since you launched the company now, it's been a long time developing your offerings and the relationships you have with producers. Of course, you have been deeply involved in competitions ever since Black and White had been open, and continuing to do that with supporting not only your own staff in competition, but a lot of other people in coaching. It feels like, at least from my assumption, and I'd love for you to tell me, there's a lot of what you import in the relationships you have and what you roast is born from these relationships that come from the competitive landscape of coffee.
Yes, for sure.
So how have you approached sourcing and roasting, and how has that evolved as you've matured as a business and continued to stay involved in competition?
Oh yeah, 100%. So a huge amount of the people that we knew in coffee and producers that we had met along the way were kind of through competition. So the barista competitions have been very interweaved into the way Black and White is, who Lem and I are as people, and how our business has operated up until now, from the beginning and up until now. So a lot of the amazing producers that we met along the way, and all those things we've had these amazing connections to, are what really started that churn and that knowledge and that push for seeing what's new and innovative and what's tasting amazing. And so I think it's that since we had access to tasting so many amazing coffees, it really opened our minds up to a broader range of what was possible with coffee flavor. And so when we set out to explore what a menu would look like, I never really had a super clear vision of what that would be, and I still don't have a super clear vision of what that will look like in a year or 2 years, because the industry is moving so fast. But we came on to coffee at such a pivotal time in the movement of coffee flavor in a global sense, especially at the very top end. From when Sasha Sestic released that first CM coffee in Seattle, was that 2015, 14 or 15? That really melted the minds of so many people. And then, yeah, it was 15, because then next year in Dublin, only 1 or 2 people had anaerobics. And then ever since then, the majority of coffees that have been served at the world's finals levels have been anaerobically processed. And so it's just like very interesting. It was a very huge movement in time for specialty coffee. And we just kind of jumped on that bandwagon and started learning and tasting and finding what was good, finding what was bad a couple times. The competitions themselves have been very pivotal in what we would bring onto our menu. It's the cart of the horse, the idea of like, was it the competitions that drove us to find crazy coffees and then continue to find crazier and crazier coffees? Or are we pushing coffees into the competition and pushing coffees into the customers? I'm not super sure, but it's been a very interesting ride. And we've become known for kind of these wild and outlandish coffees. And so we keep getting offered more and more wild and outlandish coffees. So it's kind of part of the snowball effect of that offering sheet, I guess.
Yeah, it's really cool to see even the consumers are evolving as well. We try to create this level, this almost like an entry level into black and white, kind of meeting customers where they are, meeting these coffee drinkers where they are, by providing, if you look at our menu, we have these year rounds or blends, the classic, the natural, and the original, and it kind of meets people where they are, what they're accustomed to. And then we have these crazy coffees that are on the menu too, that, when you're ready, they're there. And then we have a path for you to get there if you want to. It's not for everybody, but, and eventually I feel like a lot of people will be ready, and that structure, that infrastructure will be there for people to take and get to these wild and crazy coffees that we're really into as we explore different flavors.
And I imagine being able to have your staff reflect the choices to your customers pretty well, because it matters greatly, because the customer who is always getting the same thing every day, you don't want to necessarily force something on them, but you got to be kind of a concierge to them as an ambassador for the business, as do you if you are managing wholesale accounts who are also running coffee bars, who want the classic and the familiar. How would you say that conversation goes when you say, if they want to? Is that a result of sort of a stream of letting people know that it's available, or is there more sales to it? How does that usually happen?
Well, in the cafe, we have a pour over menu. We do have, your regular drip coffee. You have 2 options. One is kind of, your standard coffee, and the other one is usually the wild one, the different one. And, our labels on our retail bags are nicely colored, and that's your color theory of your infrastructure. Okay, if I like this classic, tasting coffee, well, I'm going to choose the classic, and then every blue label or blue hue label or green label will kind of drift you onto this road into these kind of crazy flavors. And when customers come in and they see these wild colors, these bright colors on the retail shelf, and then they see this pour over menu, it intrigues them. And then they'll be adventurous. Well, I won't get drip today, I'll get a pour over. What do you recommend? And then that's the chance for that barista to open up dialogue and say, okay, well, what do you like? And then we can guide them into this world that, Kyle and I are really interested in. And so far, they are really into it. And that's, I think, what helped us a lot in Wake Forest when we took over Back Alley, because we brought this new option for coffee drinkers in that community. And we were able to duplicate that in the other cafes. Now, online, it's a little different because you don't get to taste before you purchase. So it has a lot to do with how we market that on the website, how we market it through social media. And I think that brings a lot of interest into what we're doing and what Kyle is selecting when he's purchasing coffees. And I think the customers are really getting it. And now, 6 years later, there's this trust in Black and White in what we're doing, what we're sourcing. So whatever we source now, there's no question. Yeah, we might not like it, but there's no question that this is going to be a quality product.
Yeah, I mean, with the cafes, when we set out to do things, we made some decisions with a cafe program in the very beginning where we knew that the cafe was going to be a marketing tool for us. And so made some decisions that may have been kind of not the conventional wisdom for what cafes did. So our like single origin and our normal coffee, which is on both ways. So you can get it as espresso or as batch. So you walk in, there's kind of two labels on the counter, classic and tiki, or whatever, one of the crazy blends we have on, or one of the interesting single origin. Sometimes they're more wild, sometimes they're less wild, but we've, since the very beginning, those have been the same price. So the single origin and the blend coffees are always the same price as espresso in our cafes and as filter in the cafes, like as a batch brew. Just as, again, to be that widest part of the filter, or widest part of the funnel, to kind of funnel people into more and more conversations about why did that coffee I got yesterday taste so different than what I expected? Or sometimes it's, why was it so delicious? Sometimes it's, the not so positive. Why was that so disgusting? And you're like, oh, maybe you don't like this style, or maybe it's a little too light for you. Maybe it's a little too high fermentation for you. And that's kind of helped us kind of that feedback loop from the customers, both online and on Instagram and in the cafes, really helped us kind of codify the color system, and then also like have innovations. Like we did this kind of roast level meter, and then eventually we transitioned to not just a roast level meter, but a funkiness meter. That's like the newest part of our label packaging, where we kind of introduced this like clean to funky gradient onto the physical packaging itself, where people can know, okay, cool, it says, raspberry and red cherry and milk chocolate, but it says it's really high on the funky scale. So maybe that is like maybe that's a weirder one than because you can get similar flavor notes out of a wash coffee, but it would be on the cleaner side. So it can be a little bit tricky to navigate that whole spectrum. And so, we've had customers say, oh, I bought this anaerobic and it was amazing. And then I bought the next one and it was way different. And I was like, oh yeah, there's a huge range of what anaerobic can mean. Well, it only really means one thing, but as far as the flavor in the cup, it could be pretty dramatic. So yeah, it's just learning and trying to, again, be better versions of ourselves next year than we are this year. And that's kind of that mentality of that learner's mentality that we've tried to adopt as a company and as people as well. So,
what's interesting is you talk about that, you are innovating and iterating your process so that one, you can continue to serve coffees that you both find interesting. It's your company, and at the same time, you're doing this empathetically for the customer so that they can find enjoyment in what you enjoy too. And you're innovating these gradients and color and the scales of funkiness and everything else. That shows a level of maturity, I think, to say it's not that they just need to like shape up or ship out. In terms of, if you don't get it, then it's probably you and not us. It seems like you're thinking, well, if they didn't get it that time, maybe we weren't clear enough, or we can, like Lem, you were talking about, you have these inroads for people to have the familiar and then have the novel. And I like that approach to things because it respects the customer. I think that's really important.
Yeah, man, I was into like dark roast and blends for 2 years when I first started in coffee. Yeah, there were like lighter roasted single origin coffees out there, but no, man, I was about those rich, bold, dark, blends, and you can't really push your agenda on people. When they're ready, they're ready.
Yeah. Your description, Kyle, also, and I'm not sure if this is accurate, but in my mind, I feel like we try to label things a little bit like wine, but maybe we should be labeling things a little bit more like beer.
Oh, yeah, that's actually really interesting that you brought that up, because a lot of the movement that we've made as far as the way we think about coffee and coffee blending has actually come from beer more than from wine. So I've ended up consulting in quite a lot of beer stuff. just because like, oh, you do coffee. I'd love to do a coffee beer. I'm like, well, I hate coffee beer. So let's see if we can make a good one. And so we eventually figured out that we can make some pretty tasty stuff that's more than the sum of its parts. It's not just adding like coffee flavor to a beer. We can actually do things in a way that make them all more synergistic. So, and through just that contact point, I saw some things that they were doing that I thought were very fascinating. The coffee industry had never done well. So a huge part of what it means to be a craft beer brewer is to do these collabs. So they do these collab releases where they'll go brew beer at another place, and then they'll release it together, like X brewer plus X brewer. This is their Imperial Stout, or this is their IPA, or this is whatever they end up calling it. Like, I think one of my buddies did one. It was, oh gosh, what was it? Wit and Sam's Ultimate Adventure or something goofy like that, some like crazy
Right.
name. So I was really inspired that they can have these relationships where roasteries or breweries collaborate and have a sense of being stronger together. Where in roasteries, it's usually not that way. It's a little bit more you versus me, or like I have some knowledge that you can't have, or I roast coffee in some special way, or I source coffee from these special people that you can't buy from, or it becomes, especially not as much now, but in the years past, it was very at odds. And so I was like, why can beer do it and coffee can't? I'm like, well, I think maybe we need to learn from them and innovate so that we can be a bigger and better version of ourselves. And so that's something we've started doing. We've only done a few so far. We did a collab release with Brandywine. Oh gosh, what was it called? Mysterious or Magical Coffee Adventure or something. It was to my great shame, I can't remember the name of the label. And then we did one with Onyx for SCA with Pacific and Atlantic Specialty called Movement. But the idea was that if we don't learn to work together, then we could potentially all fail. And so that was if we want to go to that next level, we need to work together. As well as this other theory that it's pretty common that you can see a stout or a sour beer or whatever that has been aged on cherries or with coconut or with cinnamon or whatever. So all these like other things, they call those things adjuncts. So when you're calculating your beer cost, you're like, okay, cool, we have this much and we have this much cost in adjunct. So dark chocolate or coconut or rum barrels or whiskey barrels or whatever you end up doing with it. And so I was like, well, if beer can do that, and that can be very classy, cool, and like premium thing, like Goose Island's Bourbon County Stout is like one of the big releases every year that people wait in line for, and it's a huge big deal. Founders has done a bunch of them for a long time as well, and they're all this is beer that they made that they added stuff to, maple syrup or bourbon barrels or whatever, and it's like this amazing connoisseur's beverage where when we add things to coffee, it becomes like a cheap thing. So I was like, okay, cool. What if we think about it in a different way? Can we utilize the same concept as adjuncts, but in coffee? So this newest blend situation that we've come out with is called the Future, this newest iteration of the Future. This whole year, it's been based on beverages or just items. So the first one was called Champagne New Year. So it was blending coffees together that intentionally evoked the flavors and profile of champagne. And we're utilizing coffees that have been co-fermented in actually all of these blends so far this year. So co-fermented coffees are just coffee that during the primary fermentation stage, other things are added to the fermentation, whether it be cinnamon or strawberries or passion fruit or lychee or whatever. We've tasted them. I tasted a banana one the other day. It was pretty wild. And so we've been utilizing these products in blends, thinking about them more as adjuncts, so more as flavor ingredients or more as like a cocktail kind of concept to create new flavors. So the latest one we're doing right now is called the Future Tiki, which is a rum barrel aged coffee with Colombian rum barrel fermented in Colombian rum barrels, and then passion fruit, lychee, cinnamon, and then the base for that was a coffee from Costa Rica, just to have like this like lovely big sweetness. So it's spicy, it's boozy, it's crazy fruity, just like a tiki beverage would be that you might interact with at a cocktail bar. So that's the idea of the expression.
Well, that's really interesting that you gain so much inspiration from that group of people, that industry, because it's not an industry that, while they might strive to be quote unquote taken seriously by culinarians, and that's debatable, a lot of people do take that seriously, it is still a pretty comfortable industry in terms of it's not as stuffy as wine or super fine dining. It's like having, you have a lot of fun at a barbecue restaurant, more so, arguably than a fine dining. It's not as difficult to enjoy sometimes, but it's definitely celebratory. All of this makes it easier to enter into celebration, it seems, when you're having fun with the coffee, when you're having fun with your product, and when you're being really upfront with what it is. Yeah, we added this stuff to the coffee and you'll love it. And yeah, we made this so hoppy, it'll probably strip your enamel, but whatever. That's what this label says. And that's why there's this cartoon monster of a hop on it, because we made this, for the novelty of it, but you can still get, like you say, like these classic iterations of beer, but you're giving some people a place to go and entertaining them too, because entertainment's kind of part of hospitality also, isn't it?
For sure. 100%.
Interesting. So now when you think about the future of coffee, I want to ask you one last question here. And that is, based on your experiences in the industry, now just being so involved with the global representation of what coffee has to offer, I consider you all just knowledgeable about that because you're saturated in it. And you've got a successful business that reflects that back to your consumers, to the people that come to your shops. How would you like to see the industry evolve, especially in the retail roaster side of things? People who have a retail expression and a roastery, what are the things that you're greatly desirous of seeing in the next 5 to 10 years, and why?
I think it goes back to the farmers. I would like to see more and more of the industry listening to the farmer. I feel that historically, it's been the Western world telling the farmer what to do, dictating what we're going to pay the farmer. And, with the effects of climate change impacting coffee production, there have been studies of, okay, this is what's happening and this is what should be done. But I feel like the farming community has been left out of that conversation. And now with all this innovation on coffee production and fermentation, it's almost like this younger generation of farmers are taking it into their own hands to change the dynamic and create these really interesting, flavorful coffees that there has been some pushback in the industry against co-fermentation, against anaerobic processing. But in the next 5 to 10 years, I just want the industry to take the farmers more serious, because they are taking things into their own hands, and we should be celebrating that, because they are one of the biggest parts of this community. Without them, we wouldn't have this industry. So, coming back to that, the people thing, connecting people, taking care of, everyone in the industry, the entire supply chain. I just want more and more roasters, baristas, coffee professionals, importers, exporters to take that into consideration and listen to the farmers more.
Yeah, of course. I think that's like it's been a pretty cool way, especially Colombia has been probably the most obvious place where this has happened the most dramatically. I mean, Panama has kind of course, always been on that kind of radar ever since Esmeralda kind of hit the scene, and whatever. Was that 2006, 2003, Lem? I forget when when Esmeralda popped on the market.
That was like 2005.
I think it was 2000. Yeah, around there. Okay.
I mean, that kind of dramatically reshifted the role of producer, and Panama has been they've championed that idea to turn these producers into rock stars and people that you want to know, which is really, really fun. I definitely would call the majority of them outside the norm, as they came to it with a level of funding that was greater than most. You're kind of maybe not your average Panamanian producer, but the average Panamanian producer that their name has a large estate and has great funding and is educated in the whole nine. Often educated in the U.S. But Colombian producers have been, in the last probably 3.5 years, they've really been on it, because in theory, anaerobic fermentation that came from a really controlled place came out of 90 plus geisha states in Panama and then pretty quickly moved all around the world. And the place where it hit home the hardest was Colombia. I mean, that the innovation for processing in Colombia has been catastrophic the last 5 years. Some more scientific, like Diego Bermudez and that crew at El Paraíso, and then you have others with yeast, and then others with fruit, and others with fermentation and varieties. The mind of a Colombian grower, producer is astonishing. Their ability to innovate is catastrophic. It's really cool. I'm really inspired by those producers in Colombia, but I really want to see the industry as a whole, create some kind of more clear SOPs when it comes to standard operating procedures when it comes to processing. I think that's something that it's either gate kept, or it's intellectual property, or it's kind of the haves and have-nots concept, which is like, some producers have lots of funding, they have lots of money, they can innovate. Some producers just cannot. They can't afford to innovate or to create these crazy lots because they just don't have the funding available. I don't know what that looks like. That's again a problem I don't have an answer for, because I would call right now in specialty coffee kind of still the Wild West of processing. We do a lot of things that work, but we don't exactly understand why they work and how to replicate them time and again. So only really the super high-end producers can create the quote unquote exact same thing every time. And even there is variation within their product as well. So I would love to see that get more regimented, more understood. Wine has had it for quite a long time, and now you're kind of seeing people work backwards into more natural wines, into less controlled fermentation, into more spontaneous fermentation. But yeah, I would love to see that become a little bit more clear cut for the producers themselves, so they don't risk their financial income, as well as for the consumers, so they could understand what plus what equals flavor in your cup. That'd be really cool. But yeah, I think the next few years is going to be a very challenging, because you said roaster retailer. I think the next few years is going to be a very challenging landscape for the retail cafe as to, will they exist in the way that we know them now in the future? And I'm not certain, to be honest with you. It's much easier to sell 2 or 3 beers to one single visitor to your store than it is to sell them 2 or 3 cups of coffee. And the margin on draft beer versus the margin on even batch brew coffee is not even the same stratosphere. I don't know that the way we're doing it right now is going to work forever. So I'm really interested to see what that next retail expression of specialty coffee looks like.
Well, if it looks anything like what you've created at Black and White, I feel like that could be part of the solution in creating different places for people to go and really innovating a structure that respects the consumer and gives them a predictably excellent experience. I mean, I would show up every day for an experience like that, whether it was at home brewing your coffee because you've got your SOPs and you work with people who are doing great work at origin and then in your roastery, and ergo my cup, right? Same with the baristas and at your cafes. And that kind of an ecosystem seems like it could stick around for quite a long time. And even with the competitions that y'all are still involved with, it, what you're talking about really highlights these processing methods and the younger generations of farmers. And the more eyes on it, then the more brains on it, the more solutions maybe there are going to come to the fore, I guess.
Indeed.
Well, I have definitely loved chatting with you both here, and I'm so glad to finally get you all on the show. And I want to ask, where can we go to learn more about Black and White?
Well, you definitely go to our website, blackwhiteroasters.com. You can always, just check out our social media as well. Our Instagram page is always being updated with, coffee drops, some of the crazy, interesting coffees that, Kyle has sourced, and, even some of the, your standard coffee, your standard single origin, washed, Central or South American coffee. We'll drop those on our website. And if you're ever in town, we have 3 locations, all within, a decent radius of each other, one in downtown Raleigh, which is pretty interesting. It's inside of a chocolate factory where they source their cacao very similar to how we source coffee, and they roast it right there. We have our bar set up in there so you can go and have coffee and have some chocolate. Or you can go to the original location, which we will be moving soon.
Oh. Yeah, for now.
For now, yeah. But it will be still in Wake Forest. In Roseville, if you want to grab a bite to eat, you can go there and have coffee and food. And soon, very soon, when you fly into North Carolina, into Raleigh, you might find us at the airport.
Whoa, time to relook at my bookings.
Yeah.
I got to reroute to Raleigh.
Oh, yeah.
That's excellent. And
it's a big hub.
Yeah, I mean, it is. If I guess I don't need to reroute. Really. It'll do it for me.
It's not really. It'll probably route you to Charlotte.
Excellent.
For sure.
Well, I'm sure at all three of those locations, we can all get sexy foam and great coffee.
Oh, yeah. And you can always, if you want to save yourself some trouble of, getting to that coffee as soon as it's released, you can sign up for the subscription and it'll just come to your house when it drops.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, that's been huge for us. Yeah. Thanks, COVID. No, seriously, COVID, having everyone at home, online retail just skyrocketed. Subscriptions went up as well. So that's been huge.
Yes, I suppose that's the silver lining of all that.
Yeah, you got to find that silver lining because that was just devastating to a lot of people. Very sad.
Yeah. Well, guys, it was really great to talk to you, Kyle, Lem. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us on, Chris. It was amazing, man. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Well, I hope that you all enjoyed that conversation. And truly, I think that it's important to walk away from this, at least for me. What I was struck by is the idea that there's this holistic way to develop your offerings that doesn't forget about your customers, that always, like they say, they offer an on-ramp for them in the offerings that they have for coffee. So they have both standards and traditional classic kinds of blends and offerings, but they also have some pretty crazy coffees out there, and they're always seeking those out. They have a platform that can support all of it so that they, with their business, can support upstream what's happening in coffee, and they believe greatly in what's happening with the experimental types of coffee. And it's awesome to see them serving both of those communities with their business, because their customers are equally customers that come into their shops in North Carolina, people who buy their coffee online, as well as the farmers who they work with to get their coffees. Through their involvement in competition and just keeping a keen eye on curating what they offer day in and day out, they're doing such an amazing job. And I love that they want to have fun with these things, and they're pushing the envelope with what they can do with coffee and doing it boldly. So I think they're setting a great example, of course. And if you're interested in learning more about them, buying their coffee, then you can go to their website, blackwhiteroasters.com. And of course, we'll have links in the show notes where you can follow Lem and Kyle on Instagram, as well as Black and White Coffee Roasters. But definitely check out their website. And if you're in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina, you can hit up one of their stores, and I think you're really going to be pleased with your experience. So a huge thank you to Kyle and Lem for being on the show. You guys are amazing. Glad to count you as friends. And we're happy to have you in the industry and all the beautiful coffees and great example that you set daily with your business. So thank you. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback from me about today's episode, go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. I truly want to hear what you think, what you have to say, suggestions. I'll take compliments too, of course, but don't be bashful. I always like to hear from people who listen to the show. If you're interested in Keys to the Shop consulting and coaching, then I would encourage you to also email chris@keystotheshop.com. We'll set up a discovery call to hear about what's going on with your business and how I might be able to help you. So again, the email for Keys to the Shop consulting is chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that, that is the end of our show today, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this really wonderful Founder Friday. Been trying to feature Black and White for a long time. Honestly, I think one of my emails went back to I think it was 2017, actually. It was late 2017. I was like, man, I really want to get Kyle and Lem on the show. So it's only 6 years later, but here we are. And I'm glad we got to make this happen. And I hope that you really enjoyed it. So thank you, everybody, so much. Don't forget to subscribe to the show. Share these episodes with your friends, with your family, with the ticket ripper at the theater. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.